Alright, this is overdue. Let's do this. I tend to have a very logical approach when it comes to analysing Doctor Who. I'm not really a vibes kind of guy. I like to actively deconstruct why I see things in the way that I do. I find it to be a very stimulating experience, and it only helps me to appreciate the subject of the discussion more. But I admit that when it comes to colorising 60s Who, my immediate thought is a knee-jerk nope! Nope. Well, okay, it's a bit deeper than that. 60s Who was obviously made with the black and white in mind. Everyone involved in the production knew it would be hitting the airwaves like that, and thus would have turned it to their advantage. From the level of lighting in a scene to the choice of camera angles and direction, these factors would have been considered to ensure that the on-screen result was as striking as possible in monochrome. They may have been working on a shoestring, but they were still professionals, and this absolutely would have informed their creative vision, even if unconsciously. Therefore, the intended atmosphere of many of these serials is informed in part by the ghostly and cold grayscale, so taking such footage and colorizing it just clashes, to be blunt. And I feel the same about cutting the runtime down. These serials were written and paced with their respective episodic structures in mind, so removing sections runs the high risk of throwing the narrative flow off. So yeah, not keen on the idea in short. Then again, isn't transformation and recontextualization part of what art is all about? We see it in entertainment all the time. Remakes, adaptations, covers, remixes. In theory, transforming 1960s classic Who is just akin to that. Taking an already existing creative work and extracting an alternative artistic expression from it. And it's not as if the original version is gonna go anywhere. This is just a variant on the source material. A good point of comparison is missing episode animations. Yes, the creative context is different, but the result is still a modern reinterpretation of a pre-existing vision, and we accept that just fine, so why not colorize 60s Who? Above all, such a project likely wouldn't be intended for me, or really any long-time fans anyway. It would be a means of keeping these 60-year-old stories alive by creating updated versions which appeal more to current audiences, who are perhaps interested in the classic series but struggle with digesting the 20th century television format. And sure, that's a noble cause. If it gets more eyes on these old stories, who am I to knock that? And that brings us to today's subject, the 2023 revamp of Doctor Who's second ever story, The Daleks in Colour. A passion project of showrunner Russell T Davies himself, this re-edit of the original Dalek story aims to achieve the aforementioned goal of modern accessibility, transforming a dusty black and white 7-parter into a revitalised, eye-catching 75-minute special to hook newcomers to the show. So again, I'm not really the target audience. Still, I am curious as to how well such a transformative project conveys the essence of the original tale, both as a 60s Who elitist and as Bruce Forsyth's son-in-law's cousin's grandson, so that's going to be my angle coming in here. We've navigated my extremely apprehensive thoughts going in, but let's give this experiment a fair shot. Okay, no, this sucks. Yeah, ripping the band-aid off, this is a complete botch job. It's all very well discussing authorial intent and the validity of artistic reinvention, but none of that goodwill survives contact with the actual quality of this release and how badly it translates the original adventure. Where do I even begin with this thing? Well, firstly, the aesthetic alterations themselves are just ridiculous. Naturally, creative liberties were taken with what colours certain elements should be, and I think a lot of the choices made were bafflingly bad, often negating the story's intended atmosphere. The lush deep green and vibrant purple for the petrified jungle strikes me as an especially poor decision. The cold, unwelcoming interior of the Dalek city now sports bronze wall sectioning, draining away the sterile lifelessness that made the place so vividly eerie. And purple for the lighting in the Dalek control room just makes their interrogation of the Doctor look like it's happening in a strip club. Yes, there are some areas where I don't mind the choices made. I'm on board with the deep red Skaro sky and the TARDIS interior. For the most part, the Daleks themselves were translated perfectly fine, and the extermination effect has been altered to include a visible death ray from their guns like later Dalek stories, which I'm cool with, but the majority of other elements rub me the wrong way. Not just the choice of colours either, but also the extremity of it. It often looks totally unnatural. The characters' skin tones frequently look like they have either a bad case of sunburn or jaundice. Ian and Barbara's clothing and the Thal's garments are all distractingly intense and don't blend with the footage well, and the Dalek control room in general is just an eyesore anytime it's on screen. Then there's the auditory additions which just make the experience a sensory nightmare. Additional Dalek dialogue, newly composed music, and high-quality sound effects were added to this muffled 1960s production, and the result is a jarring mess of a soundscape.
She should just be on the edge of the jungle by now.
The new music isn't bad per se, but because of the difference in sound quality, it simply does not gel with the material it's paired up to, often hurting the scenes it's trying to enhance. Ultimately, I find the way this project looks and sounds to be unpleasant and not particularly complementary with the craft of the original production. But of course, that's only the half of it, because then we come to the cut down aspect. Okay, so Classic Who is frequently criticised for having a lot of filler. That, in order to meet their predetermined amount of episodes, many serials are plump with repetitive plotting, egregious padding, superfluous conflict, and not to mention repetitive plotting. These criticisms have continuously amplified in the decades since broadcast as new audiences brought up on increasingly faster-paced entertainment visit the original show and struggle adapting to the serialised format and often slower tempo. Now, I sympathise with the fact that media from a different time may take some getting used to. I really do. However, personally speaking, if given the choice between having too much story and not enough, give me the six-parter any day. Plus, I find a lot of that analysis to be superficial and ignorant, as scenes and plot threads often labelled as padding are frequently full of additional nuance for the unfolding story, like extra world building or thematic commentary, enriching characterization, tension for a dramatic moment, and so on. But that's often disregarded, as this criticism tends to focus purely through the narrow lens of narrative formula and recurring tropes, rather than considering how such moments actually service the adventure at hand, or it's a smokescreen for antipathy towards serials longer than 4 parts. Nevertheless, this point of view has shaped wider perception of the classic series, with suggestions like insert story here should have been trimmed down by an episode or two being fairly common takes. Well, now we get to put that to the test, because the Daleks in Colour trims out 100 minutes worth of content from the original serial. And while I'm sure that was largely motivated by cost, colorizing doesn't come cheap after all. Trimming the fat for modern viewers is also definitely playing a factor, given some of the stylistic choices made here. And man, am I feeling vindicated right now, because oh my god, look at how they've massacred my boy. I'm not gonna say the full serial was perfectly paced, but this is the very definition of overcorrection. I get they want to pick up the tempo, but to this extent, the story is now a herky-jerk mess, with not all, but many moments reading like cliff notes and royally screwing up the flow. This really hurts the characters. Gone is the lead stumbling upon the metallic creature, confirming that they're on an alien world and spurring Ian and Barbara's morose reflection on how lost they feel and their need for each other. Gone is Susan's terrified encounter in the petrified jungle and her distress at not being believed, which actively built up her dread later on when she has to go back through alone. Gone is the well-earned respite at the food machine, where the tension between our characters temporarily abates and they have a stress-free moment to bond for the first time. Removal of these moments renders the characters shallower, making their journeys here less investing, hell, at some points making them look straight up idiotic, and therefore removing a lot of the story's punch. Many scenes that were crucial for establishing the inhuman atmosphere of Skaro were cut, thus lessening the impact of story beats which relied on that atmosphere. The dramatic reveal of the Dalek city, that this seemingly dead world has civilization, is undercut by the prior 6 minutes worth of desolate world building being condensed to barely 1 minute 40 seconds, not to mention flat out showing it in the opening shot, and it only gets worse progress from there. Something I actually adore about the original serial is how the TARDIS crew's imprisonment in the Dalek city feels like an eternity. The slow pacing heightened the immersion, perfectly capturing the maddeningly glacial passage of time that comes with being confined and making you feel like you're trapped there with them. A Dalek even makes the point of taking things slowly to manipulate their prisoners. But now these segments are shredded down and this whole set piece comes off like a moderate inconvenience at worst. It's a sloppy trim too. The Daleks declare, through clunky new dialogue, that they shall forge the letter from Susan to ambush the Thals, justifying the removal of the scene where they have Susan herself write it. The thing is, that scene was when Susan became aware of the cell being monitored, directly leading to her disabling the camera so the Daleks couldn't eavesdrop on the escape plan. That's all absent now, meaning in this version the cell camera is never disabled, tearing open the new plot hole of why the Daleks don't anticipate or prevent their escape. Oops. The nadir of the whole experience is with Ian's prisoner and escort ruse to get them into the lift while he's posing as a Dalek. What was a gripping sequence where they're so tantalizingly close to escaping and the tension is mounting as to whether they'll make it before being exposed, is turned into a breezy, weightless, upbeat montage in the style of a spy thriller? Look, I get the vision, but it does not work. These scenes were not paced in a way to allow for that kind of framing. I could go on. Ian no longer tells the others to escape while he stays to warn the Thals, leaving their whereabouts during the ambush unclear. They completely omit the TARDIS team's ideological disagreement on having the Thals fight for their cause, which not only zaps away so much commentary on the nature of war, but makes Ian suddenly antagonizing them into action really jarring. Aladdin's inner turmoil over striking Ian is now gone, making him less complex and more like a pushover. Ganatus and Barbara's chemistry is watered down too, which, sure, it wasn't the deepest thing ever, but it was a spark, a cute connection she'd made in an otherwise unfriendly world. The trek through the swamp lacks the original's unfriendly grittiness and now just washes right past you, and the much maligned chasm jumping sequence is made more exciting, in quotes, by intercutting it with other previously separate scenes, which in theory isn't a bad idea, but again, the scenes they're doing this with aren't paced correctly to make it work, so it just comes off awkward, like you're watching a trailer. They do that a few times throughout this edit, along with flashback smash cuts to referenced earlier moments that only serve to insult your intelligence. Then the experience ends with a montage of other colorized Hartnell era clips, plus a tease of Troughton and the giggle that I'm sorry, it just comes off as slapdash. This edit is just not good. Look, I'm sure that despite my prior elaborations, someone will say that I'm missing the point, that of course concessions had to be made in order to achieve its goal, so of course it won't hit the same as the original, but believe me, I get that. But my point is, in how they've gone about it, they've ultimately done a poor job in conveying what was so compelling about the serial to begin with, stripping away a ton of atmosphere, reducing key moments to skeletons of what they once were, and style vastly eclipsing what little substance remains. You can't cut almost 2/3 of content from a 7-part serial and expect your result to maintain a good flow or consistent nuance. Sure, it's not all badly butchered. Certain moments are acceptably trimmed and still work quite well in their own context. Parts like the Doctor faking the fluid link malfunction, the commandeering of the Dalek casing, and the climax are all translated fine, but that just makes this project frustrating overall. Because while one scene is allowed to flow naturally with tastefully done visual and audio enhancements, the following 2 or 3 will have been constricted beyond recognition while looking and sounding like a mess, making for a consistently unsatisfying experience. Yes, I know I'm saying that as someone who is deeply familiar with the original serial. I'm sure there are newcomers who've watched this edit and were completely invested throughout with no complications. And that's cool. I'm happy it worked for them. I just think it could have set a better example. Make no mistake, while I have been heavily critical of this project, I don't consider this a negative experience. Ultimately, I've only come out of it with a deeper understanding of of why I liked the original serial to begin with, what made it work so well, and why it stands the test of time. So while I would obviously encourage the team behind this edit to recalibrate their priorities if they continue adapting other 60s Who outings, I'll at least have that silver lining if they don't. And at the end of the day, I suppose there was a gap in the market for this, taking the original Dalek story and making it flashier, snappier, and certainly shallower, but also unapologetically colourful for a totally different viewing experience. I guess points for originality because I don't think that angle had ever been taken before. Oh hello Peter Cushing Dalek Movies Collector's Edition and Steelbook 4K Ultra HD Blu-rays.